There's a new day dawning, the time is at hand, where the glory of the Lord will be revealed to every man. Open the door, open the door, open the door, and let the King of Glory in. Open the door. Open the door, open the door, and let the King of Glory in.
All right, let the King of Glory in. Open up the door starts right now. So fling wide, you heavenly gates, and prepare the way of the risen Lord. The Apostle John was on the island of Patmos. He was in prison for the testimony of Jesus Christ, and he heard a sound behind him. He said, behold, I looked, and there was a door standing open in heaven, and I heard a voice which was like a trumpet speaking with me, saying, come up here, and I will show you the things which must take place. That's what we need, my friends. We need a heavenly perspective of the things that are going on in the world around us, the things that the Word of God foretold us would come to pass, those things which must take place, those things which are taking place even now. That is what this broadcast is all about, discussing the issues of the day, discerning the times in which we live from a biblical perspective and worldview. Good afternoon, everybody. Andy White here, and what you are about to hear is the fusion of heart, mind, and soul. And I want to welcome all my friends and supporters and listeners from all across the fruited plain and all around the spherical globe. Thanks for tuning in to this week's edition of Open Up the Doors. Hey, do me a favor. I am streaming live on my Open Up the Doors Facebook page over at facebook.com/faithfm 91.7. If you want to see what's going on, join in the conversation over there on Facebook Live. Let me know where you're watching from. Let me know where you're listening from. And please, those of you on Facebook, please share this into your streams. We got to circumvent the Facebook censors. We've got to circumvent the Facebook algorithms. The more people that share, the best we get around the gatekeepers of the censors over there at Facebook. So again, if you never liked my page of Open Up the Doors there at facebook.com/faithfm 91.7, please like the page as well. I'm looking for as much of an interactive experience here on Open Up the Doors, and I'll try and keep an eye on the stream for a while. If you guys got any questions or comments that are pertinent to the broadcast, I will be more than happy to share them, because again, I do want to be interactive. And listen, I'm going to begin the broadcast this week. I just want to share some thoughts about this past weekend's March for Life rally that we had in Albany, New York. And then I'm going to use that as a springboard to get into some of the surrounding and relevant stories and issues that are coming to a head regarding the pro-life movement and pro-life issues. But a record crowd, folks, turned out for the largest pro-life rally in Albany history. And those are not my words. Those are the words of the Albany media. I like it. Headline, a record crowd turned out for the largest pro-life rally in Albany history. It was a great turnout, folks. According to several news sources, it was the largest pro-life demonstration ever in New York's history. We estimated, roughly, and there's really no way to tell, but my personal estimation, which might be conservative, because I don't like to exaggerate things, but I think we had a good showing of around 3,000 people. Now, someone says, well, that doesn't sound like a whole lot of people when you get the D.C. rally with 500,000 people. Yes, that's the D.C. rally, but this is New York, and we're not in the Bible Belt. 3,000 people, and it was more than tripled from last year. And listen, that might be a low estimate, because I heard some other estimates from the media that were much higher. But I do want to keep it within reason. But it was great. They came from Buffalo, New York, from the east end of Long Island, New York, where I live, from Connecticut, New Jersey, Washington, D.C. They came from Wisconsin. They came from Ohio. They came from California. We all gathered together in Albany, New York, at the state capitol building to inform Governor Cuomo and his pro-abort, anti-life, baby-killing allies that we are the pro-life generation, and we are here in New York, and we're not going to stop fighting for the human rights and the lives of those individual lives in the womb, and that it's high time for Roe to go. We kicked off the event. It was a great weekend. It really was. And I can't share all of it in the course of this broadcast, but we kicked off the event actually on Sunday night with a praise and prayer service at Victory Church in the Albany area. Victory Church, Pastor Charlie Muller, we just thank you so much if you're listening in for the use of your facility, for hosting the prayer. Because one of the things that was really on our hearts, of course, always, is that the demonstration, that the rally, that the march would be peaceful. We're Christians. We're pro-life people. We're not going to be, having a protest, throwing bricks through windows and burning down the neighborhood and turning police cars over. That's not what we do. But there are people who come against us. There are counter-protesters who do want to do that and who hate our message and who do want to disrupt the things that we're doing. And I'm saying that for this reason. As me and my wife pulled into the church there on Sunday night before the praise and worship service, there were about 25 or 30 protesters protesting outside the church with their signs and placards, pro-abortion, and a bunch of millennials. They all look like a bunch of millennials to me that were the anarchists and the typical type of people that show up on these things. And but when we first got there, they were just up on the sidewalk standing there with their signs. Hey, it's America. Go at it. You can protest. What I found out later, and I didn't personally witness, but I heard about it, and it was in the media, and there are pictures and videos of it. After we, got into the building, apparently those protesters out there got a little bit rowdy. And as the church was shuttling people into the meeting, they had gone out with their trolley to pick people up. The protesters decided to block the road and not let the trolley in. And the protesters, they surrounded the trolley and they started to rock it and push it into the highway, which was very dangerous. Somebody could have smacked into the back end of the trolley as they were pushing it back out on the road, which of course that caused the pastor and several church people there to go out there, and they had to do a little bit of a Christian love manhandling of those protesters who were acting out and acting up and being dangerous. But that turned out for the good, because it turned out after they were busted up and the cops got their names, the cops got the names of the ringleaders there of these counter protesters, and we come to find out that they were planning a big counter protest on the day of the march on Monday, which they were totally blocked off from coming. On Monday, the day of the march, talking to the local sheriff and the state troopers, they said that they were there to serve us, that they were there to help us, and that they weren't going to allow any of the counter protesters into the square where we were, because we were there legally and we had our permits. So it was an answer to prayer. Once again, what the devil means for harm, God turns around for the good. And because we were just praying for protection. We were praying for a peaceful protest, a peaceful march, a peaceful demonstration. And Monday, here was the score: 3,000 or more pro-lifers and 0 counter-protesters. Hallelujah. But that's how it began. I wanted to share that. God answered prayer. God answered the prayers of those of us who were praying for that peaceful and protected rally. And I want to give kudos as well to the worship band. This year there was a band there from the Albany area made up of different the band is made up from different musicians from different churches, is my understanding, and they're called Albany Worship. And they set such a really, really great atmosphere. As the marches came into the square, we left, we begin the march roughly about a quarter mile or so, maybe it's a half mile. I think it's about a quarter mile or so down at the farther end, the further end of the Empire State Plaza, where there's a Children's Memorial. And as we were coming into the rally area on the steps of the state capitol, Albany Worship, they were just so good. What an incredible spirit of praise and worship, and it set the atmosphere as we came in to that Capitol building. So again, hats off, Albany Worship. You guys did a fantastic job of just changing the atmosphere and permeating the atmosphere with godly music, praise and worship that just set the tone for the rest of the day's events there with the many pro-life speakers that we had. And there was many pro-life speakers. There was many pro-life ministries that came out on the street. the pro-life ministry Created Equal had set up a jumbotron with its pro-life message and video. Again, the police let them do it. I'm not sure whether they had a permit or not to do that. I really don't know about that. But it was a big jumbotron, and they had their pro-life message on there for people that were driving down the street to see. They could see what was going on. Another ministry, All Right Pregnancy Ministries, had a van out there where they were parked on the street as well, where they were giving free ultrasounds and free pregnancy tests, which is what their ministry does. Because the studies have shown that once a woman sees an ultrasound, she is much, much, much less likely to get an abortion. So again, they were giving out free ultrasound and pregnancy tests. And all in all, it was really it was a peaceful pro-life demonstration that was both uplifting and inspiring, as well as even having some fun. Even though we're fighting for a most serious issue, we can have fun doing it and have a good time doing it. And there were many guest speakers. I can't remember them all, but we had Penny Nance from Concerned Woman from America who spoke and had a good word. There was this guy Steve Carlin from 40 Days for Life. Well, I'm going to quote some of these folks later on. There were some great quotes, but Steve Carlin came from Wisconsin. Penny Nance came from D.C. Mark Harrington, I already mentioned his ministry, Created Equal. There were so many great speakers, as well as those who shared testimonies from the ministry Silent No More. But I'm bringing that up to say this, because the March for Life, it's more than just a march, of course. It's more than just a one-day event. It's an ongoing, day-by-day, year-long ministry of networking a multitude of pro-life people and ministries coming together around the banner of life, networking together with one voice, to be the voice for those whom the calloused and conscience-seared pro-abort politicians have ignored. Because here's a point of fact, and it's a sad fact. You know why these pro-abort, calloused, conscience-seared politicians don't care? Because preborn babies can't vote. Preborn babies don't vote. And they don't contribute to political campaigns, so they are ignored by the pro-abort politicians. But folks, we are a rising tide of a pro-life generation, and we will not be ignored, and we will continue to fight for the human rights of those human beings in the womb. I like how one reporter stated in one news report. I read several different news reports from several different local papers up there in Albany, but I liked what one reporter quoted, how she put it in her paper. Quote, over the thunderous cheers and applause of the marches, event president Pastor Joni Lupus declared, quote, we're New Yorkers, we live here, and we're not going away. We're pro-life, we're pro-God, and we're going to fight for life together. Amen. But what the reporter didn't report, because I remember when Joni was saying that, what the news reporter left out was when Joni looked up at the windows to the Capitol building and said, can you hear us, Governor Cuomo? Are you up there? Well, he was up there, and I'm going to get to that in a moment. 40 Days for Life, as I mentioned a moment ago, director Steve Carlin, he traveled to New York from Wisconsin. And he had commented during his time of addressing the crowd. He said this. He said, my friends from back home said, what are you doing in New York? That's not a pro-life state. And then Steve Carlin said, well, I'm going to go back and tell them I went to New York, and I stood with New Yorkers, and I prayed with New Yorkers, and I saw with my own two eyes, New York is pro-life. You hear us, Governor Cuomo? We're the rising tide of the pro-life generation. Another speaker, Denise Capuccio, a spokeswoman for Concerned Woman of America, said this in her address to the crowd, quote, we stand before a fortress of abortion, like the building before us, speaking of the Capitol building, of course. But Denise went on to say, but every event Every prayer is like pulling one brick out, and that fortress is coming down in Jesus' name. And that's what we're seeing all across America, my friends. The building, the pro-abort building, is beginning to crumble, and the pro-aborts are going nuts. I mentioned a moment ago that Pastor Joni had looked up at the windows of the Capitol and said, "Governor Cuomo, are you up there?" Well, he was. And here's what I read in a local Albany paper. The paper is called Spectrum Local News, Capital Region. But this is what the paper said there. The paper said that as we were gathered outside, the March for Lifer, the pro-lifers, as we were gathered outside the New York State Capitol building, Governor Cuomo held a meeting inside calling for the legislature to do more for abortion rights. I mean, I don't know how much more he can do here in New York. I don't know how much more he can expand him here in New York. But here's the thing. He was livid when he looked outside of his window and he saw these thousands of people marching up the plaza there, marching past the reflecting pool up to the Capitol. I heard through reports and through hearsay, I heard that he was getting irritated. And here's what I'll read from the report, from the news report. As marchers outside sang the praises of the recent heartbeat bills and laws that have been recently passed, Governor Andrew Cuomo and pro-choice supporters were decrying them inside the Capitol building during a late morning press conference. He called a press conference right when he saw us marching. And this is what Cuomo said at that press conference. Quote, "Just when you think it couldn't get any worse, it gets worse. You're right, Mr. Cuomo. You made it worse. We're not the ones who are making it worse. We're the ones who are fighting to make it better." But Cuomo said they're coming to roll back Roe v. Wade. I believe that. That's right, Governor. That's right. That is our agenda. We're not hiding it. Because just like the Dred Scott decision of 1857 that denied the human rights of blacks, the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision violates the human rights of human beings, and it's past time that Roe must go. The article continues. Who was with Governor Cuomo? Well, lo and behold, the CEO of the New York State chapter of Planned Parenthood was with them, someone by the name of Robin Chappelle Golston. And to quote her, she said, "I think it's scary." She thinks we're the scary ones. Talk about an upside-down world. "I think it's scary," said Robin Chappelle Golston, CEO of Planned Parenthood Acts Empire State. Quote, "I think all women are scared." Remember that, folks. All women are scared. And this is a terrible trend that is taking part across the country. Don't you just love the arrogance of these self-appointed spokesmen of, quote, "of all women"? All women are scared there, Miss Golston? What about the woman down below you in the Capitol Square? What about those women? What about the woman? What about the hundreds of thousands of pro-life women who are scared of what you and your bloodthirsty Planned Parenthood are doing? What about the women who are sick and tired of your lies and the blood that you shed in the name of women's rights? Miss Golston, memo. Just take a memo from the Vice President of New York March for Life. You do not speak for all women. Here's a reality check, Miss Golston. There are more women in the pro-life movement than men. That is a fact. I know the leftist propaganda machine keeps churning out the myth that it's old, straight, white guys who are trying to suppress women's rights. But that's just another bold-faced lie and distortion that keeps coming from the godless left in order to protect their abominable sacrament upon the altar of abortion. Chappelle Golston says she fears even more states will take pro-life measures now that President Trump has placed 2 conservative justices on the Supreme Court since taking office. To quote her one more time, I think this is their whole goal. Well, you don't have to think it. We're telling you it is our goal. It's time for Roe to go. That's our goal. But she says, I think this is their whole goal. To pass these laws they know would not hold up in a Supreme Court that was not anti-choice. But now, hopefully, we have a pro-choice Supreme Court. So there was Governor Cuomo fuming up there in the Capitol building with his Planned Parenthood Jezebel by his side. Irritated at the sight of all of us pro-lifers demonstrating there. So he says they're going to do even more to expand and protect abortion. Folks, I can't help but to think that just as Moses was calling on Pharaoh to let my people go, Pharaoh responded, if you remember, by making the burden even greater on the Israelites. However, it did not go well for Pharaoh in the end. Stick around. I'll be right back. Here's Jason Upton. Freedom.
Freedom! Let him go in the name of Jesus. Let him go.
Let him go. Let him go. Let him go. Let him go.
Let him go.
Oh, telling Pharaoh, let my people go. And that's what it was like being up there in Albany, talking to the powers that be, saying that we are standing there for freedom and we're standing there for human rights. Welcome back. Andy White here. You are listening to Open Up the Doors here on Faith FM. If you're just tuning in, WEGB 90.7 and 93.3 in that peak. WEGQ 91.7 in Quad. And I feel like it's probably one of those broadcasts where I got to put out the caveat that the views expressed by the host of this show, namely me, are molded by the Word of God, along with the empirical evidence, both experiential and observational, which is lived out by me on a daily basis. And those views may not necessarily be the views of Faith FM, but they are my views. So if you have a problem, you can contact me at ajwhite777 at iCloud.com and complain to me if you don't like my views. But don't complain to the radio station. They might have different views. Don't let the media fool you, my friends. Don't let the media fool you with all their shouting and screaming coming from the pro-abort side. It's easy to think the side of abortion is winning. However, the polls suggest otherwise. I was looking at a bunch of polls the other night, and I want to tell you that this apoplectic screeching that is coming from the other side is more due to the waning support of ending human lives in the womb and the growing support of the pro-life movement. That's why they're screaming. That's why they're making so much noise. According to a recent Harvard University poll, this poll just came out the other day, very few Americans agree with the Democratic Party support of abortions without restriction through all 9 months of pregnancy. A recent Harvard Capps-Harris poll found that just 6% of Americans said abortions should be allowed up until the birth of the child. Those are 6% of people with seared consciences, my friends. Only 8% said that they should be permitted in the third trimester. This Harvard-Harris poll also found that a majority of Americans want the U.S. Supreme Court to revisit Roe v. Wade. Hold on to that thought, because it's going to become a central theme in a few minutes here. The majority of Americans want the U.S. Supreme Court to revisit Roe v. Wade. More than 50% of Americans want the U.S. Supreme Court to reconsider Roe. The polling does show a mixture. There are some conflicted results when you go through the polls, and I don't want to go through all these figures and stats because I know that can get a little bit tedious over the radio. But the movement's in our favor. The movement's going in our direction. Another survey found that 55% of voters said they do not think that laws banning abortions after 6 weeks when an unborn baby's heartbeat is detectable are too restrictive. 55% of America, of voters, do not believe that heartbeat bills are bad. You better believe the left is screaming, my friends. And throughout the years, Gallup polling consistently has found similar results, that a majority of Americans oppose most or all abortions. But you don't hear that from the left. They flip the stats on the side. And I know you can play around with stats. I know you can. But I want to get back to that Roe v. Wade for a moment. That hit me well. That's a really good sign that more than 50% of Americans want the U.S. Supreme Court to at least reconsider Roe. And that's a key. That's a key point, because a direct revisit of Roe ought to result in it being overturned. Because it'd be hard to modify it. It'd be hard to modify Roe for two reasons, I think, personally. One, the bench can't legislate law, at least they're not supposed to. And two, Roe v. Wade was so badly decided that I don't know how it could be carved out in any other way. I mentioned last week that Clarence Thomas has said it on numerous occasions, given the chance he would rule to overturn Roe v. Wade. Thomas has often made clear that he believes Roe was a mistake, and he's not the only one. Folks, make no mistake about it. I'm going to talk about this for a moment here. Make no mistake about it. Roe was woefully a bad judicial decision, not just morally, but the very judicial and legal premise has always been questionable, and many, if not most, legal scholars attest to it being a specious legal decision. Fact, this is a fact. Roe v. Wade is one of the most widely criticized Supreme Court decisions in American history, equaled in its tragedy only by the Dred Scott decision. It's on equal footing with the Dred Scott decision. Now listen, folks. I'm going to be upfront. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a constitutional expert, although I do enjoy reading the Constitution and reading about it. But I was always under the impression that a civil case may be reopened if the prevailing party committed a fraud upon the court. And here's a fundamental thing that a lot of people, I don't think, are aware of the history of Roe v. Wade. The actual case that was presented by Norma McCorvey, who was Roe, the actual case presented, it was a fraud. The main lie was that an abortion was needed for Roe, Norma McCorvey, because she was supposedly gang raped. But that wasn't true. It was a lie. She was just trying to use the rape excuse to get an abortion. So she lied. The case itself was premised on a lie. McCorvey just wanted to have an abortion. And her attorney really falsely promised her to get one, knowing full well it could not happen in time, because cases that go up to the Supreme Court take time to get there, to adjudicate them. So the whole Roe v. Wade was predicated upon a lie, and it was pushed through predicated upon a lie. But another thing that was going around at the time, and we've heard this from time immemorial from the left and from the pro-aborts, but here was another lie that was going around. The lie was that the number of women who supposedly died in America because of legal abortions were about 10,000 women a year. That was a completely made-up number by abortionist Bernard Nathanson. By the way, both Nathanson and Norma McCorvey eventually got saved and became Christians and became pro-life. That's an aside. But the lies and that went forth from the very beginning with Roe v. Wade. Nathanson admitted, he publicly admitted that he made the number up from thin air. But of course the media and the pro-abort left grabbed that number, and to this day, all we ever hear about to this day are the thousands and thousands of women who died from illegal back alley abortions. But do you want to know a fact? This is a fact from the U.S. government CDC. In 1972, the last year before Roe v. Wade, the CDC reported that 39 women died from illegal abortions in America. Now, that might be 39 too many, but it's a far cry from 10,000. And I got news for you. That many women and more die from legal abortions. So the whole thing is a charade. It's a scam. The courts, in deciding Roe v. Wade, based it upon the 14th Amendment, which says that no state can, quote, deprive any person of life. And let me stop right there. Well, okay, let me back up. Let me rewind the tape a little bit. The 14th Amendment says that no state can deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Here's where the ruling really begins to crumble. And why there's been a movement for personhood amendments to the Constitution. We get a personhood amendment to the Constitution. And I think that's a long shot, but there are groups trying to get personhood amendments. But it would be a personhood amendment that would recognize that life in the womb is a person. It would override the 14th Amendment, because the 14th Amendment says deprive any person of life. You see, the court is saying that baby in the womb is not a person. And they also ignored, when they made the ruling on Roe v. Wade, they also ignored the part that says without due process of law. John Rehnquist was the lone dissenter. There might have been another judge, but I think he was the lone dissenter. No, I think there was. I can't remember who the other one was. But John Rehnquist wrote the dissenting opinion and why he felt that Roe v. Wade was horrifically determined. And I'm just going to summarize it. I can't go through the whole legal readings right here. But Rehnquist basically summarized 5 points of why the decision in Roe v. Wade was horrible. He said, number one, the court should only have considered the facts of the case at hand, which was a Texas law that was being discussed, but they brought in all these hypothetical cases. Rehnquist saying they should have never done that in the first place. Number two, the right to privacy found by the court of Harry Blackmun lacks support in the Constitution. Number three, some parts of the decision were basically legislating from the bench. I said a moment ago, you can't make law from the bench, but these activist courts have been doing that. And that was Rehnquist's objection in his dissent. He said that the Supreme Court was basically legislating from the bench rather than even attempting to decide whether the law in question actually violated any controlling law. Again, the law in question was a Texas law prohibiting abortion in the case of Roe v. Wade. Number four, the history of the law and amendments indicates that the Texas law did not violate the intent of the 14th Amendment. The decision they reached was much broader than justified by the facts of the case. Even Ruth Bader Ginsburg has attested to as much. But Harry Blackmun, the Supreme Court justice who actually wrote the majority decision on Roe, called the court's decision to even hear the case a serious mistake. Let me repeat that. I got Siri going on here. Go away, Siri. I don't even know why that came on. I had it turned off. Siri's always interrupted me. But Harry Blackmun, let me get back on course here. The Supreme Court justice who wrote the majority decision, he was actually against even taking the case up because he understood it wasn't really violating the 14th Amendment. Before joining the court, as I mentioned a moment ago, current Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said this about Roe, quote, that Roe was not measured because it invited no dialogue with legislatures. To this day, friends, there are untold numbers of legal scholars who are pro-choice. I took out a list of pro-choice legal scholars. Pro-choice legal scholars who have nevertheless, even though they're pro-choice, and even though they like the results of the Roe v. Wade decision, they have harsh criticism of Roe's legal reasoning. In a Yale Law Journal, legal scholar John Hart Ely, a supporter of legal abortion, complained that, quote, Roe is bad constitutional law, or rather, it's not constitutional law, and gives almost no sense of an obligation to try to be. This guy wrote, and remember, he's pro-choice. What is unusual about Roe is that the liberty involved is accorded a protection more stringent than what the present courts accorded the freedom of the press explicitly guaranteed by the First Amendment. What is frightening about Roe is that this super protected right is not inferable from the language of the Constitution. That's what Rehnquist had said. They invented a right that's not there. At times, the inferences the court has drawn from the values the Constitution marks for special protection have been controversial, even shaky in the past, but never before has its sense of an obligation to draw one been so obviously lacking. Edward Lazarus, he was the former clerk to Justice Harry Blackmun, who wrote the Roe v. Wade majority decision. Edward Lazarus, quote, as a matter of constitutional interpretation and judicial method, Roe borders on the indefensible. I say this as someone utterly committed to the right to choose. However, Justice Blackmun's opinion provides essentially no reasoning in support of its holding. And in the years since Roe's announcement, no one has produced a convincing defense of Roe on its own terms. And I don't have the time. I've got a list of people here. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Kermit Roosevelt, University of Pennsylvania law professor. Let me just quote a little bit of him. He says, it is time to admit in public that as an example of the practice of constitutional opinion writing, Roe is a serious disappointment. You will be hard-pressed to find a constitutional law professor, even among those who support the idea of constitutional protection for the right to choose, who will embrace the opinion itself. They like the result, but they're saying, but it's based on nothing. Quote, as a constitutional argument, Roe is barely coherent. The court pulled its fundamental right to choose, more or less, from the constitutional ether. Now, this to me raises a question. If all these people who are legal scholars, as well as those in the Supreme Court, know that Roe is so terribly decided, why does the present bench of the Supremes have only two or three exceptions, Thomas and Alito, maybe Gorsuch, but it remains to be seen what Gorsuch and Kavanaugh would do. But these guys continually harp upon Roe being settled law. It's not. Legal scholars all agree, or mostly all agree, it's terrible decision. So why do they keep upholding it? They know it was highly questionable. They know it was a wrong decision. I'll tell you what the answer is, my friends, in my humble opinion. D.C. politics. D.C. politics and the desire to be liked within the elite beltway muckety-muck crowd. In other words, they want to get along with the swamp creatures, and they don't want to overturn Roe v. Wade. I got to get to a break. I really do. I got to cut down some of my monologue here, but it needs to be trumpeted, folks. It really, really needs to be trumpeted. Roe is a constitutional travesty whose time has come for it to go. Roe must go. Stick around. I'll be right back. Here's Jason Upton. Again, it's a Jason Upton kind of a day. All things are possible. Roe will go because all things are possible. I'll be right back.
All things are possible when we realize truth is not time out what it seems. Only how it
The fusion of heart, mind, and soul. Let's open up the doors with Andy White here on Faith FM, WEGB 90.7 and 93.3 FM. Oh, wait a minute here. I forgot to turn something off here. I forgot to turn that off. See, all these things you got to do at the same time. Anyway, welcome back. You're listening to the fusion of heart, mind, and soul. Open up the doors here on Faith FM, 90.7 and 93.3 in Napeague, and WEGQ 91.7 in Quad. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. God bless you all across the Fruited Plain. I am streaming live on my Open Up the Doors Facebook page over on facebook.com/faithfm 91.7 if you are just tuning in. Let me know you're out there. Like my page if you never liked the page. You can also email me at ajwhite777 at icloud.com. It's ajwhite777 at icloud.com. Listen, if you are outside of the Faith FM broadcast area, the best way to listen to Faith FM is to download the free apps. We have the free Faith FM app. You can find the apps over on the HamptonChristian.com website, where we're streaming over the internet as well. We have the apps for the Apple iPhone, the Apple iPad, the Android platforms, and they're free. And then You can listen to Faith FM 24/7 all across the fruited plain with no interruptions if you'd like. Get the apps. It's a great way to go if you're outside of the broadcast area. Okay, I got a few minutes left here, and I want to bring something up here that really is troubling to me. There's this guy, Reverend Rob Shank. I remember him from years ago. He was a real pro-life warrior, but unfortunately he's moved on over. He's defected to the dark side. About a week or so ago, the New York Times posted an editorial by Rob Shank. The name of his piece was "I was an anti-abortion crusader. Now I support Roe v. Wade." What a shame. What's even more of a kick in the gut to me is that Rob Shank is the president of the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Institute in Washington. It's mind-boggling to me. He writes in his article, and it's a very lengthy article. I'm not going to read the whole thing, of course, but there's a couple of things I want to pick out of this article. He writes in his article, overturning the Supreme Court's 1973 decision would not be pro-life. It would be destructive of life. It's mind-boggling reading this. Rob Shank was a former leader of Operation Rescue. But now he's spouting in this article the shallow and defeatist talking points of the pro-abort left. Shank in this article goes through the typical leftist litany of poverty and how hard life is for the poor, essentially leaving you with the unavoidable conclusion that it's better not to be born than to be born. Life isn't a gift from God. It's a burden to be avoided. You're better off dead than to live life in this miserable world in poverty. Those aren't his words. But that is essentially what this article that he wrote is saying. I will quote what he says here, this one paragraph. Quote, over the last decade, I have changed my view on Roe. I've come to believe that overturning Roe would not be pro-life. Rather, it would be destructive of life. I have witnessed firsthand and now appreciate the full significance of the terrible poverty, social marginalization, and bald-faced racism that persists in many of the states whose legislatures are now essentially banning abortions. If Roe is overturned, middle and upper-class white women will still secure access to abortion by traveling to states where abortion is not banned, but members of minorities and poor whites will all too often find themselves forced to bear children for whom they cannot absolutely care. I can no longer pretend that telling poor pregnant women they have just one option, give birth and try your luck raising a child, even though the odds are stacked against you, is pro-life in any meaningful sense. Wow. Wow. Rob, you worked to fight Roe v. Wade for 30 years. I remember you. Yet adoption never made its way into your lexicon? Your editorial, Reverend Shank, is a tragic commentary of someone who apparently has lost his faith and focus on what constitutes God's purposes for life. And even though you claim otherwise, this article reveals a heart of apostasy and a loss of faith. Furthermore, I find it profoundly alarming. Rob, I found it profoundly alarming that you are the president of the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Institute in D.C. Here's what Bonhoeffer had to say on abortion. Quote, destruction of the embryo in the mother's womb is a violation of the right to live, which God has bestowed upon this nascent life. To raise the question whether we are here concerned already with the human being or not is merely to confuse the issue. The simple fact is that God certainly intended to create a human being, and that this nascent human being has been deliberately deprived of his life, and that is nothing but murder. Hear that, Reverend Shank? The guy you represent is rebuking you. Let me go on with the rest of Dietrich Bonhoeffer's quote on abortion. A great many different motives may lead to an action of this kind. Indeed, in cases where it is an act of despair, performed in circumstances of extreme human or economic destitution and misery, which is how Brother Shank tries to justify his abortion position. Bonhoeffer is recognizing these issues exist. He goes on to say the guilt may often lie rather within the community than with the individual. Precisely in this connection, money may conceal many a wanton deed, while the poor man's more reluctant lapse may far more easily be disclosed. All these considerations must no doubt have a quite decisive influence on our personal and pastoral attitude towards the person concerned. In other words, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was saying we need to deal with these people with compassion and understanding, yes. But then he ends with this. But those circumstances cannot in any way alter the fact of murder. Though there may be reasons given, and though we must move in compassion with people in those situations, nevertheless, those reasons never diminish the fact that that's a human being who has a right to life. And your outward circumstances do not give you the right or the justification to commit that act of murder. Mr. Shank, I'm going to read a little bit of another quote from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer said, stupidity is a more dangerous enemy of the good than malice. One may protest against evil. It can be exposed and, if need be, prevented by use of force. Evil always carries within itself the germ of its own subversion, in that it leaves behind in human beings at least a sense of unease. Against stupidity, we are defenseless. In all this, the stupid person, in contrast to the malicious one, is utterly self-satisfied, and being easily irritated becomes dangerous by going on the attack. Never again will we try to persuade the stupid person with reasons for his senseless and dangerous. And I condensed the quote because I'm running out of time. But I think Dietrich Bonhoeffer is rolling over in his grave with the thought that a stupid person is heading up an institute that bears his name. Ryan Baumberger of the Radiance Foundation wrote a scathing rebuttal to Shank's New York Times piece. And I don't have the time to get into it. It's a great, great rebuttal. And he answers all of Rob Shank's delusional and leftist justifications. I'm going to post it. I'll post it in the comment stream later on today because I am running out of time here. It's a great article that this guy, Ryan Baumberger, wrote. But he said he just takes Rob Shank, he just takes him to the woodshed. He really does. It's a great article. I can't get into it. But you see, the left incessantly and willfully, they propagate these talking points that are lies, that pro-lifers aren't there to help the moms or not there to help the children who were aborted. There are ministries all over this country, foster care ministry, Christian foster care ministry, Christian orphanage, adoption agencies, crisis pregnancy centers. They're all over America. The pro-life movement is networked together. That's what I was talking about in the first block about March for Life. It's more than a march. It's more than an event. It's a networking of all these pro-life ministries to help do the very things that the talking points of the left try to smear us with and lie against us. But they're woefully ignorant, because there are these ministries all over the country that help women who are in need. Why doesn't the federal government, by the way, fund adoption instead of abortion? Do something to lower the cost of adoption. There's no such thing as an unwanted baby. There are hundreds of thousands of people in this nation who are more than willing to adopt these babies. It would wipe out abortion if they made the adoption laws more accessible. And I've talked about that in times past. But we're being told abortion will never be abolished. We're being told it's too entrenched in our political system. We're told that it's a settled law of the land. But that's what they said about slavery as well, my friends. The Dred Scott decision was a bad decision. Roe v. Wade was a bad decision. Once upon a time, Jim Crow laws were woven into our society and were considered the settled law of the land. But a small group of people rose up with the moral courage to fight against the injustice and the immorality of the Jim Crow laws. Today, we are seeing a people rise up with the tenacity and the perseverance and the moral certitude that it's going to take to wage the fight against the injustice of these pro-abortion laws. And it's a battle and it's a war, and some have defected, like I just shared about this guy, Rob Shank. But my friends, even as Jim Crow laws were once the law of the land and given legal weight by the misguided Supreme Court, and the Dred Scott decision eventually went by the way of a more enlightened society, they were eventually overturned because people grew in their wisdom and in their knowledge and their enlightenment. And I do believe that the misguided decision of Roe v. Wade can be overturned in our day by a more enlightened people who are willing to fight the good fight and to speak up with the moral clarity and stand up with a moral conviction that will not waver nor falter, unlike Reverend Shank. I want to tell you, my friends, that as surely as those Jim Crow laws were eventually overturned, so Roe v. Wade can be overturned as well. But it's going to take a rising tide of public outcry and unrelenting pressure placed upon our elected officials and on the judiciary. History, my friends, I believe history is on our side. And the pro-abort crowd is on the wrong side of history. We're seeing that we're making positive inroads on the public perception of the brutality and inhumanity of abortion. But we still have got a long way to go, my friends. There's still a war. There's still a battle going on. The pro-aborts own the media, and they have the money to feed their propaganda machine to misinform the ignorant masses. You know, the mantra on the left used to be abortion, safe, legal, and rare. But today, their mantra is shout your abortion. Folks, we need to shout louder. We need to fight harder. It's time for Roe to go. It's time. It's actually past time, my friends. We need to shout louder and we need to fight harder if we really want to see the day come when Roe will finally go. And I've got to go. My time is up here. But thanks for tuning in to another excursion into the fusion of heart, mind, and soul. Tune in again next week. God bless you, everybody.